I was born in 1954, so that was 17 years after the flood. But my parents were born, my father was born in 1910, my mother in 1915. So they were both in their 20s in January of 1937 when the flood took place. Now, my father was employed in a local theater, just as a film technician, whatever. Mother worked as a sales clerk in Pomeroy at a store called Elberfeld's. Well, when the flood came in January of 37, the Ohio State Patrol sent a communications team to Pomeroy, and they were looking for locations that were high enough out of the river water and high enough to where their signals could be transmitted over a long distance. So they asked my grandparents, who now, well, I live in the house where my grandparents used to live in, 401 Lincoln Hill Road in Pomeroy. They asked if they could set up shop in the upstairs of their house. My dad was a ham radio operator, and they used their equipment, Dad's equipment, and it was a radio station, which helped Pomeroy, Middleport, Meigs County keep contact with the rest of the outside world because they were cut off, you know, no rail transportation, no road transportation, telegraph lines were down, telephone lines were down. So radio was the only way they could communicate, and they did. People had evacuated their homes along the river, moved to higher ground, and they didn't know what the weather forecast was going to be. They didn't know when help was coming, and there was a network of radio operators. Some of them were government radios, some of them were amateur radios, and they all worked together to make this kind of a network, primitive network. You know, there wasn't anything digital back in those days. It was vacuum tubes. This is even before the age of transistorization, which occurred in the 1950s. So they all worked together, and they were able to maintain a level of communication that helped alleviate some of the suffering that took place as a result of the flood.